Now we're going to look at one of the coolest features in PHP, at least I think it's one of the coolest features, and that's the way that it manages sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with an example, and then we'll look at how it actually works. I'm going to create two pages. So PHP file page 1 and PHP file page 2. And then on page 1, I'm going to start a session. And I'm going to store a value on $under_session, which is a super global variable. And the key will be myArray. And then I'm just going to put an array here. So kiwi, strawberry, apple, pear. And then I'll also put my name, which is Mark, and I'll echo hello world. And then in page 2, I'm going to start a session. And then I'm going to print R $_under_session sub myArray. And then I'm also going to echo $_under_session my name. So watch what happens when I load these pages. So I'm going to go ahead and load localhost CIS 195p week 7 page 1 of PHP. And it says hello world. And then watch what happens when I load page 2. I get my array, kiwi, strawberry, apple, pear, and my name, Mark. So as if by magic, page 2 has access to all of the properties that I've set on this $_under_session array back in page 1. And they stick around. So if I have another file, page 3, I can do the same thing as in page 2. So that's going to be there until the session expires or until I destroy the session. Now this is a great mechanism for maintaining state on the server side. So all the information in this session is on the server side. So for example, if you want to have a shopping cart that the user can add items into that remembers what items the user's added, or in the video poker demo, if you want to have a session remember what the current hand and the current deck are instead of using a PHP post to do that, you can just stick them in the $_under_session super global variable, and it will be available through all of the pages that start with session start. So how does this actually work? Well, the way it works is that there's a session ID, which is stored in a cookie. So every time you have a session start here, the first thing PHP does is check to see whether a cookie was sent by the browser. So as part of that request, if the browser sends a cookie with a session ID, then session start is going to find the existing session that matches that cookie and is going to load the data into the session superglobal array. If there is no cookie passed by the browser, then session start is going to create a brand new session with an empty $_under_session array and also set a cookie on the browser with a session ID. And then the session ID itself is going to be a randomly generated string that's stored under the key PHP Session ID by default. So if I go back to my browser and look at my cookies for localhost again, You see I have PHP Session ID, and that's the cookie where PHP stores the session ID. So this is basically a random number that's been base64 encoded. And the reason it uses a random number is to make this key name harder to predict. So anybody who actually knows this particular key and has access to the web server can spoof the session by setting a PHP Session ID cookie to match this value. And that means somebody can actually hijack your session if they know this cookie ID. It's part of the reason you usually want to send cookies and session content over secure connection. But generally speaking, this value is going to be so long and complicated that the odds of somebody being able to guess it are really low. So this is a pretty safe thing to use. And then associated with this session ID, there's going to be a file on my local, on the server's hard drive. So I'm on the web server now under the XAMPP folder. And by default on Windows, the sessions are actually stored under XAMPP temp. So here you have a session file, which starts with ses underscore, and then has the same file name as this session ID. And if I right-click on this and view it in a text editor, this is what I see. So I see the key name myArray, and then a serialized version, a string version of the contents of myArray, and then another key for my name, and a serialized version of my name. So everything gets flattened into string form and stored in a session using the PHP command serialize. And then start session, when it's executed, is going to read this file and it's going to unserialize the contents. So basically anything that can be serialized can be stored in the $ under session superglobal. And that includes arrays, strings, numbers, some kinds of objects, and some kinds of resources.